Hello, my name is Erin Kern and I am a student at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. Today I'm going to talk about the London cholera outbreak of 1854 and the role of John Snow in solving the mystery of why and how it happened. So first let's begin with cholera itself. To the right you can see a picture of the cholera bacteria, which of course John Snow did not have at the time that he was studying it. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, cholera, or Vibrio cholerae infection, is an acute diarrheal illness caused by infection of the intestine. It can be characterized by profuse watery diarrhea, vomiting, and leg cramps. Cholera was very common back in the mid-1800s when John Snow was studying it, and can still be found today, although not nearly as commonly as it was in the 1800s. So who was John Snow? Well, according to Peter Vinton Johansson's book, Cholera, Chloroform, and the Science of Medicine, A Life of John Snow was a general practice doctor that lived in the Soho neighborhood of London. Although he was trained as an obstetrician, he established a general practice in the Soho neighborhood and treated many cases and many patients. John Snow was also adamant that cholera was transferred from human to human, and he also hypothesized that this method of transmission was water, so he did think that cholera was a waterborne disease. In 1854, London experienced a cholera outbreak. Although it had experienced several cholera outbreaks before, this one proved to be particularly deadly. Within the first 10 days that the cholera outbreak occurred, the death toll had reached 500, and this was approximately 12.8% of the neighborhood, which was more than double that of the rest of the cholera outbreaks in the city of London. By the end of September, when cholera had worn itself out and there were no new cases, the death toll stood at 616 people. Cholera was a horrible disease that affected anyone and everyone. People were frightened and afraid, and they did not know what to do when they got this disease. And if you got this disease, it was most likely a death sentence. So today we're going to ask ourselves the question, can spatial analysis provide some insight into the underlying process that caused the London cholera outbreak of 1854? So we're going to start by mapping cases of cholera in the Soho neighborhood, using data collected by John Snow back in 1854. And then we are going to map water pumps and water pump trade areas, basically the areas where people lived who would use specific pumps. And we're going to see if pump data is, in fact, as John Snow hypothesized, related to cholera cases. So we're going to begin first with a map of the Soho neighborhood and plot the density of cholera deaths. The darker the red, the more likely there is to be a cholera death in that area. You can see there is one standout spot in the center where the most cholera deaths occurred. We're then going to add on the mean center of deaths, shown here by a black X, and that is the center of where the most cholera deaths occurred. Then we're going to draw the standard deviational ellipse. So this area is where most of the cholera cases occurred. So if you were in this area, you were most likely to have or get cholera. So then we're going to map pump data. So we're going to start with the same map of Soho and plot pump locations on it. And then we're going to go ahead and draw trade area lines. So if you live inside one of these lines, you are most likely to go to the pump that is in the area that you live. So now let's see what happens when we put these two maps together. Here you can see that we've mapped the density of cholera deaths over the pump locations and trade areas, and the most dense spot of cholera deaths lies right on top of a pump. Here we've plotted the mean center of deaths, and it happens to lie right next to a pump. While we don't have any hard and fast data, we can infer from this spatial analysis that it was most likely this pump closest to the center of deaths, which was the Broad Street pump, that was causing this cholera outbreak. Here we've colored in the trade areas that were most affected by this cholera outbreak. If you lived in these darker red areas, you were most likely to have cholera or get cholera very soon. This is a more simplified map stating the same things. It would be very useful to the people of the Soho neighborhood in 1854 because they could easily see that the darkest areas of red were where cholera was most prevalent and where they were most likely to get it if they lived in those areas. So from this data, we can conclude that yes, John Snow's hypothesis that the Broad Street pump was causing the cholera outbreak of 1854 was most likely correct. On the left, you can see a picture of the Broad Street pump that still stands today as a monument to John Snow, with its handle still taken off from when he took it off in 1854 to stop the outbreak. John Snow was a pioneer in epidemiology, and he was one of the first to use spatial analysis in the realm of health and treating patients. Thank you for your time.